as far as whether or not Donald Trump will accept the election results, I think we have a much more aggressive attorney generals in the states that care about protecting voter integrity. We've seen this. This is not just a rhetoric or talking points. Even in my home state of New Jersey, which has arguably far more number of Democrats than Republicans, we've seen a significant amount of irregularities on the voting polls and election fraud literally being prosecuted by Democrat attorney generals. It's not unheard of to have these types of irregularities in election frauds. President Trump chooses to accept the elections. It's going to be fact-based. It's going to have to be evidence-based. And I think if there's enough overwhelming evidence that there was election irregularities that caused an illegal outcome of the election, I think any candidate would have a right to challenge that. Right now, it's such an emotionally charged event, and I think a lot has to do with the Democrats' hatred of Trump and the Republicans' distrust in the Democrat selection process. Right? We had Joe Biden, who was the rightful nominee, step down, and Kamala Harris was anointed into her spot and put as the nominee without receiving any votes. And so I think there's already a lot of distrust in the undermining of the proper process of letting the people decide who the representatives are. When you see the talking points that Kamala Harris has been putting out, the CNN town hall that she just recently had, the most common phrase and term that she uses in all of her policy discussions is two words: Donald Trump. And she's obsessed with Donald Trump. The negativity just means that her campaign continues to feel threatened. Otherwise, as a former U.S. Senate nominee, when you're campaigning, you're not really campaigning in the negative if you're above. You have former President Obama significantly stumping for Vice President Harris right now, an activity that we hardly saw him engage in when Joe Biden was running for office. And so right now, what it calls to the average insider in politics is that the Harris campaign has become quite desperate. This race, I think the Democrats think the race for the presidency is over. They think that Donald Trump is going to win. Where they're most concerned is the down ballot races, the local races, the control for the House, the control for the Senate. That's where I think Democrats are expressing the most sense of urgency and doing the most damage control that they can. Even just as recent as the hurricanes that have completely thrashed Florida, North Carolina, and the eastern seaboard, she made the hurricanes a campaign point, calling the Governor DeSantis of Florida, where Governor DeSantis said that he had never received a phone call from Kamala Harris in the past, and now that she's campaigning for presidency, she's acting as if she cares and she's trying to do something. So the track record was there. She had 3 years to do stuff. She just didn't do it. She should have. She just didn't.
You're watching America Decides with the Times of India. The 2024 race to the White House between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris is closer than any in the history of US elections before this. Joining us today is Rik Mehta, a Republican entrepreneur and attorney. Welcome to the show, Mr. Mehta.
It's great to be on. Thanks so much for having me.
Lovely. With less than 10 days to go for voting day, Mr. Mehta, the Republican Party is looking pretty optimistic about its chances, but it's a 48% to 48% tie as per the latest polls.
Yeah, that's right. Listen, the polls are about as trustworthy as weather predictions. We know the pollsters got it wrong in 2016 when Trump had a major victory, and they got it wrong in 2020 again. So you have to go based on what you see. And part of the reason why some of this polling is wrong is because it's hard to take into account the data of what we call low propensity voters, those that are inspired and empowered and emboldened to vote in a presidential election where you don't normally see them coming out to vote or being involved in American politics. And so this year is very different. It's been extremely charged. We've had 2 assassination attempts on the former president. We've heard extremism rhetoric and arguably on both sides of the party. And so our country has become quite divided. And so more and more people are paying attention. And so you're not going to have that type of voter data captured in the surveys that are being done. But what you can see is the palpable energy and excitement out on the streets, at at the rallies significantly for President Trump and the change that he's going to bring from the last 4 dark years that we've had in America under the Biden-Harris administration.
You talked about that you see an energy, but I also see the same kind of or similar energy in the Harris rallies and campaigns. I've been tracking those very closely. What makes you say that there's more energy in the Donald Trump rallies and campaigns?
Yeah. I mean, you also have to look at the media perception that's been very biased and slighted towards the Harris campaign. You know, when you see the talking points that Kamala Harris has been putting out, the CNN town hall that she just recently had, the most common phrase and term that she uses in all of her policy discussions is 2 words: Donald Trump. And she's obsessed with Donald Trump. The negativity just means that her campaign continues to feel threatened. Otherwise, as a former U.S. Senate nominee, when you're campaigning, you're not really campaigning in the negative if you're above. When you start going down a dark road of campaigning on a negative diatribe, that the vitriol that she's thrown at President Trump, that means that you're losing ground and you're losing support. You hear it from the Democrat campaigns and their strategists. So we really haven't actually seen the kind of pull, the kind of rallies, the kind of enthusiasm. You saw President Trump working at a McDonald's, right? Appealing to the average voter, again, the low propensity voter, those that are going to be supercharged to turn out. You actually have not really seen that. And most importantly, you have not really seen that in the swing states that matter. Now, we're talking about the popular vote, but America is a republic at the end of the day. And the popular vote does not carry the winner of the presidential election. What it does, the way that our democracy is set up, our republic is set up, is based on electors and the electoral vote. And that's why it's so important to understand that while she might be supercharged in Philadelphia and Los Angeles, those 2 cities alone are not going to determine the outcome of the race. And so you have to look at the swing states where the 2 folks are campaigning and the energy that's building in Pennsylvania, in Michigan. You have former President Obama significantly stumping for Vice President Harris right now, an activity that we hardly saw him engage in when Joe Biden was running for office. And so right now, what it calls to the average insider in politics is that the Harris campaign has become quite desperate.
In which voter segments is Donald Trump really gaining as per your assessment? Is it the Hispanic vote? Is it the black vote? Or is it generally across the board?
So what we've seen in terms of the polling numbers, and again, the polling numbers amount is trustworthy as the weather, as I said. But you're seeing a lot more support than you ever have in some of the minority and minority voting blocks, as you mentioned, but really across the board. So Donald Trump has significant ground among male voters than, let's say, female voters. But amongst subspecialty groups, let's say, or subspecialty populations, let's say Hispanic and Black, Donald Trump's numbers has surged. Now, that doesn't mean he has more support than Kamala Harris, but if Kamala Harris's votes are determined on those voting blocks of where Donald Trump has now taken a significant amount of that share of votes, then that definitely should be concerning for the Democrats. Now, this race, I think the Democrats think the race for the presidency is over. They think that Donald Trump is going to win. Where they're most concerned is the down ballot races, the local races, the control for the House, the control for the Senate. That's where I think Democrats are expressing the most sense of urgency and doing the most damage control that they can. And then oftentimes you see that the rhetoric is going towards more extremism to probably appeal to some of those races to assure, a more favorable outcome to what we call damage control for the Democrat Party. But yes, I think there's a lot of concern right now in the Democrat Party that Donald Trump has undercut what would be normally a safe vote for them, and significantly higher margins that Joe Biden carried in 2020 than we're seeing Kamala Harris to carry this election.
The economy and inflation have become one of the biggest issues in this election. What do you believe a Donald Trump presidency will do for the economy versus a Kamala Harris presidency?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the good thing is we don't have to guess about this. We have former President Donald Trump and we have current Vice President uh, Kamala Harris. And so under the Trump presidency, we already saw low interest rates, low inflation, a thriving economy. And until COVID hit, we saw some of the lowest unemployment rates the country has ever seen, especially among minority groups, African American groups, which historically have experienced high unemployment rates, had the lowest unemployment rates on record. We saw a significant amount of reforms. We saw the housing prices become much significantly more affordable, and America was thriving. And so there's already a track record which Americans understood and are leaning on. And it wasn't that far long ago, so they still remember what it was like under the Trump presidency. That being said, the last 4 years, America has seen a significant decline. We've seen unprecedented inflation. We've seen significantly high interest rates. Just looking at the macroeconomics for small businesses, it is extremely difficult to run a business. As a business owner and an entrepreneur myself, we understand that liquidity is an issue and American economy continues to struggle. Now, what does that mean for the average American? Gas prices are higher, normal household goods and kitchen products,
Let me
food
just
prices are high.
interrupt you
Yeah.
there. Kamala Harris has gone on record, however, to say that her presidency will not be a rerun of the Biden presidency, and that it will be the policies will be different, and she has her own way of understanding what needs to be implemented, and she will draw on her personal experiences, and her presidency is going to be different.
Well, she can say whatever she wants. The truth is, she's been a power of influence. I mean, she's literally second in command. She is the vice president. She's had multiple projects charged under her leadership, like for example, border security, which we saw a complete failure. It wasn't until she started campaigning for presidency did she finally go visit the border, and really not very meaningfully. So even the projects that had significant projects that the American public had trusted her with, she completely failed and failed to deliver. And so again, it's not a guessing game. During campaigns, both sides are going to use words. When Donald Trump campaigned and then when he became president, he followed through with almost every single aspect of policies that he said he would. He said he'd build a wall. He did. He said he would fix the economy. He did. Kamala Harris has been nothing but rhetoric and talking points. And unfortunately, we just haven't seen that kind of progress. Now, for putting aside Republican versus Democrat, the average Americans actually want the president to be successful. We want Biden and Harris team to be successful. And they just haven't. She just has not delivered. And so even just as recent as the hurricanes that have completely thrashed Florida, North Carolina, and the eastern seaboard, she made the hurricanes a campaign point, calling the Governor DeSantis of Florida, where Governor DeSantis said that he had never received a phone call from Kamala Harris in the past, and now that she's campaigning for presidency, she's acting as if she cares and she's trying to do something. So the track record was there. She had 3 years to do stuff. She just didn't do it. She should have. She just didn't.
Okay, but the race is still tight, so to speak. As I said, the latest polls for popular vote, and we're talking about, say, they're tied at 48% to 48%. But the other polls also talk about a very, very close race. This is perhaps the closest race that the American president's position has seen in the history of American politics. So, in case Trump does not win, do you think he will accept the result, or will it be a likely rerun of the 2020 insurrection that the Democrats say is more likely to happen?
Yeah, look, again, I think the polling really just can't be trusted. If Kamala Harris wins the popular vote, she may, right? If she might have a significant amount of votes come in from Los Angeles, New York, and Philadelphia, so what? That's not how our election is going to choose who the next president is, because it has to be fair and equitable to all states all across America as a republic.
Hmm.
As far as whether or not Donald Trump will accept the election results, I think we have a much more aggressive attorney generals in the states that care about protecting voter integrity. I think election fraud, we've seen this. This is not just a rhetoric or talking points. Even in my home state of New Jersey, which has arguably far more number of Democrats than Republicans. We've seen a significant amount of irregularities on the voting polls, and election fraud literally being prosecuted by Democrat attorney generals. So it's not unheard of to have these types of irregularities in election fraud. So I think whether or not what President Trump chooses to, accept the elections is going to be fact-based. It's going to have to be evidence-based. And I think if there's enough overwhelming evidence that there was election irregularities that caused an illegal outcome of the election, I think any candidate would have a right to challenge that. So it's hard to predict what Donald Trump will do
Challenging it
come in
legally.
2024.
Sorry, challenging it legally perhaps is not the problem. What the Democrats and what a large portion of America would not want a 2020 like insurrection again at what we saw on Capitol Hill in 2020.
Right. Well, listen, the insurrection, and I don't think that most of America is living in the past. I think they're trying to see if they can afford their kids, tuition rates and whether or not they can put food on the table. I think that's really what Americans care about right now. But if you want to talk about the insurrection, you have to understand that was predominantly more than 2 million people that came there, of which a small percentage decided to act recklessly and criminally, and rightfully have been, prosecuted. And so, I think there are charged emotions. What I think is most disconcerting is the amountful hateful rhetoric that we're seeing from the Harris administration of late, comparing President Trump to Hitler after he's already had 2 assassination attempts. What exactly is the party doing to cool emotions such that violence can be prevented? And I think that should be concerning for all Americans across both sides of the spectrum. Right now, America really has no place for violence, and we really need to cool temperatures down.
I couldn't agree with you more. Cooling of temperatures is required because, as you said, both sides, the kind of polarization you're seeing perhaps in America today has never been seen before.
Yeah, I mean, at least not in my lifetime. And I agree. I think right now it's such an emotionally charged event, and I think a lot has to do with the Democrats' hatred of Trump and the Republicans' distrust in the Democrat selection process. Right? We had Joe Biden, who was the rightful nominee, step down, and Kamala Harris was anointed into her spot and put as the nominee without receiving any votes. And so I think there's already a lot of distrust in the undermining of the proper process of letting the people decide who the representatives are. And I think right now, both sides are carrying a bit of rhetoric. And of course, we're leading up to the election. And I have good faith in the American public. I have good faith in America. We still are the strongest, fairest country in the world, arguably. And of course, I'm biased. I love this country. And I do believe in the American people. And I think that will start to dissipate as we see the results come out. And, it's probably not going to be a surprise when President Trump wins overwhelmingly in November.
All right, you seem very convinced that he's winning this one. You're a biotech entrepreneur yourself. What inspires you most about, let's say, Trump's leadership? What do you believe was his biggest accomplishment as president?
Yeah. Well, again, we keep talking about people, but let's talk about policies. That's where I come in. I'm also a health policy expert and been an attorney. And what I see is what the future generations are going to look like. I have 3 boys at home. At the end of the day, that's my primary concern. And what's the future going to be for them? And how are we going to help children like mine break out of cycles of poverty and create generational wealth for a more free and fair society? One that looks past race, that looks at accomplishments, meritocracy, and the achievement of the American dream. And as my father came to this country from India in 1969, I too want to make sure that the future and the challenges that they persevered are preserved for the future generations, for our American children. And I have seen economic revitalization for America under President Trump. And so I am more than confident that our economy is going to be thriving, which again, it's a trickle-down global effect. A strong American economy is good for India. It's good for the rest of the world. It's good for any country that believes in freedom and democracy. You know what it's not good for? Communism and terrorism. And that's, I think, why there's so much excitement about the Trump administration, where we had 4 years of peace, a thriving economy, and we were able to put to bed communism, terrorism, and aggression at large. And I think that's going to be good for the world at large.
All right. Thank you so much for your inputs. We don't have time for more than this, but thanks for that analysis. Thanks for your views on this, and let's see how it plays out on November 5. As I said, the race is close. Uh, both sides and emotions are really really high on both sides. But let's see how this plays out on November 5. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your inputs.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.